We've got a good group. Thanks everyone for joining. This should be really fun session. I will kick us off with some intros and a bit of an agenda, and then we're really just going to get into the meat of the conversation. I know Kieran and James have lots of opinions about the state of go-to-market training and everything around feedback and coaching. So we'll jump in. This is not in a formal webinar room, meaning you can participate. We want the chat to really be meaningful and representative of what everyone on the call is going through and really how you feel about what you're hearing of this survey. And I'll explain the survey here in a moment. But yeah, so this is really cool because it's focused on enablement. Obviously, that are here are part of the squad and we're all in the enablement functions. Expect a really intimate, direct conversation. It is being recorded, so be careful. You never know who might get a hold of it if you're speaking about your org or previous orgs that you've worked with. Or if you're like Kieran, you just don't care and you'll say whatever. I am Leanne and I have been in enablement for about 5 years. Prior to that, did sales and sales management in SaaS. So that's the world that I live in. And then obviously we have Kieran and James here with us. Kieran, why don't you go first? And then James, you can introduce yourself and tell us anything that you want us to know. And then I'll kick us off. Kieran?
Hi, everybody. I think I recognize a few faces on the call, so lovely to see you again. But for those who've never heard me talk or speak, my name is Kieran Smith. I am currently the Senior Director of Enablement at a company called Technology Advice. We're a full-service marketing company. I actually have a very similar background to Leanne in that I've been in enablement roughly the same amount of time. Made a conscious choice to move over after being a salesperson in sales leadership for just over a decade. And yes, I'm happy to burn go-to-market to the ground as long as we come out stronger afterwards. So I'm more than happy to share my opinion. James, I'll hand over to you, sir.
Thank you kindly. Also, Zoom says that your name is Ashir, which you might want to update. But yeah, hi everyone. Like Kieran, I recognize a couple of people on the call as well, which is great. So my name's James. I'm the founder of the company that commissioned the survey, but from an enablement perspective, for the kind of 2.5, 3 years before I started Replicate Labs, I was a VP of enablement and client services at a company called SimilarWeb. So we literally started the business as a result of the challenges and issues that we were seeing there. And I've obviously seen this survey, this report that you're going to get access to after in depth, and I'm really excited for the conversation today. So it's going to be great.
Awesome. Thanks. And I forgot to mention that currently I serve as the Director of Go-to-Market Enablement for an Australian company called Megaport. Okay, so I'm going to give a little bit of background on this survey. We've talked a lot about the survey and the debate. What exactly is the topic here? And then I've got a couple of polls to get everybody engaged in the conversation. And then we'll just jump into a couple of themes of the report and get the conversation going. So over the last few months, the Replicate Labs commissioned a survey, but it's really more just to get a feel for how reps, managers, senior leaders in enablement feel about go-to-market training. Everything from the actual training to coaching to feedback, adoption and impact. So we're thinking about training from not just getting a message out to teams, but also does the behavior change in the trenches? And I call that out because you'll notice by the survey results, like, that's really where things start to break down. Is we can train all day. That's the easy part. Getting people to actually change their behavior is a whole different conversation. Many of you have probably had experiences with that. And obviously we're gonna discuss that. So before we get started, I've got 2 polls. So head over to chat for me. Question 1, I'm gonna go ahead and send it, is on a scale of 1 to 5, how do you think frontline managers rate themselves? Oh, as a coach. So in terms of how they coach their team, and we're specifically talking about frontline managers here, in your enablement thoughts world, 1 to 5, how do you think they rate themselves? Yeah, we've got some 3s, some 4s, a 5 in there. I'm going to say 5 because sales managers think they're the bee's knees. And in a lot of ways they are. So we're not here to knock them down off their totem pole, but I think that they oftentimes think that they are great at coaching. So then next question here is, what % of managers said in the survey they need more training on how to coach. Yeah, so most of you are saying 75 plus. So it's interesting. You think they rate themselves as a 4 to 5, but then when you ask the question, could you use more training on how to coach? They say yes to that as well. Opening that up, the two main themes of the survey, and going back to, hopefully most of you took the survey because we promoted it through the enablement squad. But if you remember, one of the first things you said was your role. And so that allowed us and James and his team to splice the data by the enablement folks, the managers, and the reps. And so that's where the results get really interesting in terms of what people are looking for and how they see things today. So two main themes are that first, there's an overwhelmingly strong belief that training, practice, feedback, and coaching can make a difference. So most everyone agreed that if we practice, if we get more training, if we get more feedback, we'll be better. James, Kieran, let's get the conversation started there. What do you think of that? What do you think of the fact that most everyone is saying more training, coaching, feedback equals better results?
I'm going to try for the most part and speak second in this thing. So,
Hear it.
Okay. I think that's oddly or ironically where the dichotomy in this conversation starts, right? Because if you ask reps, they'll say there's too much training, but then if you ask them what would make them better, they would say more training. And I'm not a huge fan, as many people could attest to, of the word training in this situation. I call it all enablement because I'm a purist at heart. But no, I think where we fall down is around the relevancy and the actionable stuff that people can work on that actually make a difference. I think all too often, unfortunately, from an enablement point of view, and we're going to get to the probably the opposite version of this, but we might create something that we think people need and then roll it out as a blanket training or a blanket enablement program without actually understanding the details of the data behind it. I know that's something you're also exceptionally passionate about, Leanne, is the data and why are we doing it. I think quite often, realistically, people do want more training, but they want more training in things that matter to them. And do we always get close to that bullseye? No, I don't think we do. And even when we do, I think we're clear in the learning objectives, the takeaways, and what they can do today to make a difference. So I think it's not a problem that falls at one department's door or one particular person's door. I think there has to be more detailed conversations around benchmarking. Why are we doing it? Which behaviors do we want to change? How long is it likely to change that? How do we communicate what's in it for reps? And as I said, ultimately, why are we doing it? I think we often get lost in that and we feel like we have to do some kind of enablement and we often miss the why. If we don't have that, we can't even get to the how to change the behaviors. If the why is not understood, then we're struggling from Jump Street.
Yeah. Yeah. And James, I'll turn it over to you. But with that, Kieran, and we've talked about this a few times, it's enablement sometimes feels like they just have to pick up what they're told by all these managers as to what they need training on. So manager joins a meeting, sees a bad discovery, decides and sends a message to enablement that says, you need to do more discovery training. So I also have a hill that I'll die on, that it's our job to reframe that and to say, what's making you think that? And how does that lean into our overarching strategy? And one of the things that is so meaningful from the survey is that we really need to be looking at the difference between training and practice, because training is the easy part. Practice equals reinforcement. So, James, as you think about it, the second big takeaway was what we do today doesn't work. So you ask people, what do you want? They say more training. Then you say, how do you feel about the current training in your org or what you've experienced? And they're like, it's crap. So what do you think?
I have a lot of thoughts. I think if we put a kind of value selling hat on for a second, right? Like people don't want training. They don't want feedback, coaching, practice, access to tools. They don't want any of those things, right? They want to make more money. They want to improve their performance. They want to be better at their job, right? They want to make their customers happy or whatever their primary driver is. And they see that they're not at their maximum capability there right now, right? So what they want is to improve that gap, right? To close that gap and improve their performance. And logically, words like training, coaching, feedback, enablement feel like something that should do that. I think, the key word in that question was, the view was that it improves performance. The key word was like when done effectively, right?
Mm.
So pretty much everyone, I think it was 99% of people that did the survey said, when done, this will improve performance. And then there was another question I think we're talking about later on of what would happen if you turned off what you currently do. And this isn't specifically enablement like what you guys do, right? This is the whole kind of functional area, not just the practitioner ownership. And there's this overwhelming view that it doesn't work, right? Like you don't buy a conversational intelligence platform to listen to one call a week. That's not why you buy it, even if it might be how you end up using it.
How you use it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that like the intent is there. And then the real kind of fundamental core of the problem, from my perspective at least, what the data kind of says to me is we need to understand our audience. We need to know who we're selling to, how best to sell to them, right? Like we need a really deep understanding of our like personas, if you like. And that comes out in questions where like value selling, 80% of reps say that that's the number one thing that they need training on. So once you start to go that 1-2 layers deeper of what are we actually doing, how are we doing it, what topics are we focusing on, even ignoring like the big draws like ROI measurement and planning and all that kind of stuff, like just at its core, what you're turning up and getting, right, as a rep is not the same stuff that you're thinking of when you're saying, yes, absolutely, that should help my performance and make me more effective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, what I think is interesting, and we didn't really talk about this too much when we were all looking at the survey together, is when you talked about understanding your audience. And over the last, Kieran and I probably represent a lot of people that 4 to 5 years ago made this transition into enablement, because before that, it wasn't a thing. A lot of the managers did take it on themselves, and those that had that passion transitioned to enablement, probably a lot of you on the call. And now you've got schools of thought around, should you come from learning and development, and should you really understand how to teach adults? Or should you come from sales? Should you know the material that you're teaching? And I don't know if it's one or the other, but I want to call out what Terry just said. I believe there needs to be top-down organizational support to enlist everyone's support for the initiative. Without that, people only participate to the level that they're being held accountable. And that is where this kind of all comes together, and we'll get there. But you spoke about it as a functional area. Like when we think about what needs to change in the enablement world for us to not continue to get laid off, it's not what we do as enablement in the trenches with coaching and feedback. It's how we transform our organizations to have more coaching and feedback and practice across the organization. And we hold a responsibility, and the managers hold a responsibility, and our high-level leaders hold a responsibility. So that's something that we'll talk about. But Casey, your question, talk more about what you mean, what happens if you turn off what you're currently doing. That leads us into our next point, which is, as we think about the current state of training, coaching, feedback, go-to-market enhancement, really, tech stack perspective. Drop you guys in the chat what tools you're using. And that could be anything from an LMS, CMS to how you're coaching and conversational intelligence and things like that. That's really what we're talking about, is systematically how our organization's functioning. So drop that in the chat. Kieran, you got a golden gong. We know that's super exciting. Congratulations. James is very proud of you on that.
You're the one gong user.
Hey, talk about how you see tools used right and tools used wrong, I guess is the best way to say that.
Yeah, that's we could spend probably 6 hours just talking about that, right? I think James nailed he used a slightly different analogy, but like it's like the old sales adage where the man who goes to B&Q or Home Depot doesn't want to buy a drill bit. He wants to be able to put up the shelf to stop his wife complaining to him, like that old sales adage. And again, I think we often forget that when we buy any sort of tool. What, to your point, James, what do we buy it for? And again, I go back, so I'm a big believer in RevOps and enablement alignment. I believe it's a hand in glove, or a left hand and right hand. And I was very lucky and very fortunate when I first came in to enablement. I worked under a fantastic team And we, for every project, we had an enablement lead and a RevOps lead, and we also had tool ownership. And the way that we set that up was, because most of the tools were there. That's not true. Probably like 75% of the tools were there when I was there. So the first question is, why did we buy it? What did we want to use it for? And how are we currently using it? And how many people are currently using it? So we had to all pretty much immediately do a current state analysis. And then from there, we would then plot, okay, we bought it for these features, were not there. It had, and then just essentially like a program, break it down over 3, 6, 12 months, work with the CSM over there, breaking it down. But I think we've seen companies waste it's probably close to billions of dollars at this point if we did it collectively on tools that they don't use. And I think even to James's point about Gong, the Gong is not a coaching platform. If that's what you bought it for, then that it's not going to give you a coaching culture. Now, interestingly, that is how Gong sell itself to enablement, right? But the thing is, I've got more from the data from Gong than anything else, and that's how I've been able to Terry's point is, what is the strategic business objective for H1, H2, Q3, Q4, whatever it is? What is that? Okay, what are we currently doing? And again, we'll mention it again. Leanne, you and I have spoken about it. What's the benchmark? And this is something I've been saying quite frequently, is like benchmark, impact, success, right? If you understand what the benchmark is and the impact that you've got to make. So for example, if you're going from 20% of something, a conversion rate or whatever it is, win rate, to 50%, that will inform the size and the complexity of your program and also the timeline from there. And so, Casey, to your point, so the impact is the impact on behavior, and the success is what that means for the company. For example, if only 20% of conversations have this or mention that, from the program, the impact that we have made is to move it to 25. So our impact has been 5%, but what the success is then, what has that meant for the company later down the line? And very rarely do we actually measure all of those things. So that we look back at our tool and we say, what's the ROI of this tool? No idea, because we've not been using it right or using it correctly. So for me, impact is different from success. And I'm quite, again, to use Leanne's phrase, that's a hill I would die on, because I made a post about it today. I think us talking about ROI as an enablement team is very dangerous as a team, because we'll be dragged into a conversation about overall win rate and money added to the bottom line. I'm a huge believer in the impact and effectiveness of our programs. So that is, how much behavior did we move? How much pipeline did that then create? But we have so little control over the overall ROI. That is why I have success and impact separated, because we can control impact to a certain degree. We can have that causation and correlation fight about success, but I know that the effectiveness and the impact of the programs that I create. So that's why I split it out. So hopefully that answers your question. And if you disagree, then feel free. Like that's just my personal view as to why I do it. So I'm happy for people to tell me I'm talking rubbish. That's absolutely fine.
I made a bit of a swipe last time I spoke, right? Leanne told me off. Fair enough. But the point, like I think that the sales phrase is like, you don't buy drills, you buy holes. But yeah, I think that the point is very true. Like, people buy these tools for the wrong reasons, and nothing shows that better than the viewpoint of the people that buy it versus the viewpoint of the people that are meant to benefit from it. And Arshia, throughout this webinar, is sharing actual stats from the report, and she's just dropped some big ones in. So the people that buy it, your senior leaders, my managers, I think enablement answered in the same kind of field as well, right? Give overwhelmingly positive views of tools like conversational intelligence, right? 90% of senior leaders, budget owners, saying that it materially makes people a better coach, right? But the only people that should be judges of if managers have become better coaches are the reps. And the viewpoint of the reps is either that it's a waste of time, right? 1 in 8 say that it's a waste of time. That's not a small statistic, but half of them say it only helps a little bit. And if these platforms cost you $20,000 a year, helping a little bit with a large enough pool of people might be fair enough. But when we're fighting for every budget dollar that we have to buy meaningful, even data of who to speak to, let alone enablement tools, like, it's a losing battle if you start to share stats like half the reps only see marginal benefit from it. And I don't think, and I think Kieran nailed it, I don't think it's that there's a material problem with these tools, right? Like, when I've purchased multiple tools in this category, right? When I was in enablement, I think it's that we buy them for the wrong reasons. And when we do buy them to do a job. And then we don't pay any attention to whether or not they actually do that job. And then we tend to renew them based on hype, brand, usage, activity, and stuff. And we forget the goal, right? If you had a rep where the rep's job is to hit $1 million a year in quota, and they're working really hard, but you're not measuring how much money they're making, and you keep renewing them, right? You keep paying their salary for years. Like eventually that's something that's going to backfire. And that's effectively what we do with all forms of tools, right? Not just CI. I've seen the behavior myself. And I think it's the first real data that we've shared that shows this enormous disparity between the hierarchy of a go-to-market org and what they think about enablement.
Ooh, say that last part again. The disparity between the hierarchy of a go-to-market org and how they what about enablement?
Think.
How they view. That's just like such a concise way to express what's going on in our world right now.
Yeah, I think that there was a question earlier of I made a comment about turning things off. One of the questions that we asked in the survey, Arshia can share the exact statistic, was, and it's polarizing to that starting comment of what's your viewpoint of how successful enablement and training can be, was if you shut it down, which means if you did zero training, zero feedback, no call reviews, whether it's managers, enablers, like whoever's doing it, you do nothing. Reps are only tasked with just going and speaking to clients. What would happen to their actual performance? And this, for me, is one of the most shocking statistics of the entire thing. About 25% of managers and leaders said that performance would go up. The reps would actually do better. And that is an incredibly damning view of the current state of play when almost 100% of them think it should materially improve performance, right? So I think that was the comment I made earlier that I just wanted to expand on. But it's this enormous polarization of viewpoints that we see consistently throughout the report.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they see it as a waste of time, right? It's this theme of if done effectively, it should work. How it's done today doesn't. And as you're talking, and as I'm looking at the chat, we're at a point in enablement where an LMS and a CI tool are table stakes similar to Salesforce's table stakes for ops and as a CRM. But then when you compare that to the learning methodology that I kind of subscribe to, which is teach, show, watch, do, all of those tools capture those first three. You can teach someone in an LMS, you can show them what good looks like, you can watch them do it in Gong or in an CI tool, but none of that hits actual practice and showing them, like watching them do it in the real world, giving them feedback, coaching them, saying, okay, now do it differently as we practice. And so what you said, Casey, it's yes, we buy for the wrong reasons, but we also sometimes, the expectation is that a tool does something that it's not meant to do. Because at the end of the day, sometimes people are meant to be that bottom of the food chain coach, mentor, and pushing someone to practice. And if you go back to in-person sales, when I was in sales, some of my most effective when I was in sales management, some of my most effective conversations were the to and from conversations with the reps of how are you going to go about this? Okay, then you go in there and you do it. And you come back and we talk about it. And then I say, let's practice it so that you know how to do it differently next time. So there's so much about the whole practice component, but the tech stacks that we have expectations for from enablement don't hit those.
Right. So over 2/3 of reps say that they do zero practice, despite it being the only answer in the entire report that reps, managers, enablers, and leaders agree on, is saying that it's the number one reason why what's taught in the classroom doesn't get used in front of actual customers. Like, it's bizarre. Everyone agrees, but then 2/3 of the population don't do anything about it.
Yeah. And the analogies to sports get old, but it's the same thing. Your tennis coach doesn't say, we'll hit the ball like this without then saying, show me how you can hit the ball like this 10 times until it's muscle memory. But in our world, that's where managers think that's unproductive or that it's not their responsibility. So the next topic, which I think is probably, aside from tech stack, the most like the biggest thing that needs to be fixed in enablement is who should own coaching, who should determine what enablement does, because sometimes it's the enablement person determining what they do and they're doing the coaching, and it's this siloed, I get my training over here, but then in the trenches, my manager doesn't enforce that. So, like, this whole thing of A, who decides what enablement should do, and B, how does it actually get enforced? And there's lots of comments around this whole we are not enforcers. And another thing to think about enablement as compared to a full cycle sales rep. So we went through this evolution of a full cycle sales rep becoming an SDR and an AE and a CSM, and now starting to backtrack that. Kieran, think about us coming from sales manager to enablement. What did you pull away? You pulled away accountability. You're still doing a lot of the same things that you did as a manager. You're creating SOPs, you're training your team, you're coaching and feedback. But at the end of the day, there's this other piece of it that is holding the people accountable. And that's where I'm like, just like the SDR is a little bit broken, are we a little bit broken, and how do we fix it?
I could talk about this ad nauseum. Coaching is a massive passion of mine, always has been, both as a sales leader and now I coach sports my whole life. So it's something I've made mistakes with being in enablement as well, in terms of assuming that other people like to coach as much as I did and saw the value in it and those sorts of things. But I will just never be convinced by anyone, sorry to everyone listening, that enablement should own coaching. I just will, and I say that as someone who's done a massive amount of coaching as an enabler. To the very first enablement role I had, I coached lead managers, I coached reps. We didn't call them pips, we called them coaching plans, and enablement was responsible for the weekly coaching on those. Why? I'll never understand. Not only do we give away that accountability that you mentioned, Liam, but we also give away the authority. That they don't have to listen to us. And I'm not trying to make it a very us versus them, but we also have this sort of stereotype of managers, or they have this stereotype of themselves that I'm super busy. I guarantee you, if you don't have time to coach, you're busy with the wrong things. Now, the other element of that is, do we as enablement support managers enough? And I think we'll come on to this, and I think we've discussed this many times, but if you ask any manager in the world what to coach, and they know why they should be coaching, but very rarely do they know how. And I would say that's probably less than, in my experience, less than 15% of managers know how to coach. And an awful lot of the reason behind that is they've never been coached themselves. So do we have a part to play in preparing managers to coach? Absolutely. Should we be the ones responsible for coaching? You'll never convince me of that. And again, if you were to compare our job description with their roles and responsibilities with theirs, we've got enough to do, right? Like more than enough. And if you can't fit that time in, right? And as I said, I feel like I know I've sat in every sales position other than CRO. You'd never convince me otherwise, ever. And the thing is, I think where this problem starts, again, very similar to Terry's point right at the start, is there is a miscommunication of expectation between senior leadership and frontline managers on how to coach. And quite often the senior leaders are the ones putting the internal meetings or the internal responsibilities on frontline managers to be in this meeting or this forecast or this. So then they don't have time. So at least 50% of the time, the company's stopping a frontline manager from actually being able to coach. And in case to your point, yes, so I made this mistake when rolling out Gong, interestingly, monkey bars, both of the conversation intelligence and the coaching. So as I said, I assumed everyone loved coaching as much as I did. So I got the Gong hat on. I bought Gong as a sales leader. I've had it in 2 different companies as an enablement leader. I just made the assumption. I created these wonderful scorecards, and I created all these wonderful things, and I've got put in this, said you have to have this many, a minimum of this many calls to listen to, this many calls, and nothing happened. The needle didn't move because I assumed that they knew how to do it. And then I went round and I felt very deflated. It's probably one of the biggest failure, but biggest learning of my enablement career was that. So then I went round and I spoke, and I was like, yeah, I'm just not comfortable. And I thought, I didn't even take that into consideration. So we actually created an entire leadership development program, but it was centered around coaching. So it was effective one-to-ones. We gave them question frameworks around like the grow model for that. Then from there, we gave them, this is how you do call coaching. And then so it was again, the differential between coaching and feedback, which is something I'm very passionate about. How to not just give feedback, how to like where the first question after any sort of coaching session is, how do you think that went? And then you take that, you dissect that. So we did, and I think I gave them a list of questions. Then we moved it to how to do a deal review. And again, it was based around coaching, based around our methodology. So it was all like Socratic method and guided discovery and all these lovely things. But after that, and that was one of the main things behind the Golden Gong win, was the category one was impacting revenue performance. So it wasn't just about coaching, but one of the things we did with SDRs is to Leanne's earlier point about where does this come from, I had the director of sales development come to me and say, we need to work on objection handling. And I said, okay, where does that come from? Why do you think that? Firstly, that will trigger me faster than anything. There's probably only one other thing that will trigger me faster, and that is, can I have a one-pager? Right? That is laptop closed for the day if you ask me for a one-pager. But so he said, yeah, I've listened to some calls and we can't get past these objections. So I said, okay, let me go and listen. And in 1 year, in 2022, I listened to 2,238 Gong calls individually, personally. So I know my way around Gong. And I went and listened to 50, 60 calls, and they were getting a massive amount of objections. But the reason was, the problem was not the objection handling. The problem was they were asking the wrong question to start off with. I'm in a different room, or I would flash the ward up, don't you worry. Basically, what happened was they were, Andela did staff augmentation, but we didn't speak to talent acquisition and HR teams. So what was happening is the SDRs were still going in and going to the VP of engineering with a problem they didn't own. So they would say, oh, James, you're the VP of engineering for Replicate Labs. I see you've got 3 vacancies for your team. And they go, yeah, go and speak to talent acquisition. So we'd immediately be on the back foot. So from there, we changed and created an entire cold call framework in terms of these are the types of openers, these are the questions, this is how to close for the meeting, this is how to open with insights, this is how to objection handle for real objections. We then reinforce that with practice, rollout, breakout rooms, all these lovely things. It was then also reinforced by managers having a KPIs or calls to listen to, feedback and coaching to give. And over the next quarter, we booked more meetings by phone than any other time in Andela history. And that was a very much, it takes a village. So that was a tool, that was an identification of the actual problem with an in-depth program. But the big part of it was the coaching, and the managers really bought into the coaching, and it made a significant difference. So that is how we taught them to coach to a specific thing. Overarching to that, we created a leadership development program with coaching at the heart of it. And then everyone felt a lot more comfortable with coaching.
I think so. I can't believe you know the exact number of calls. But
You can't believe that.
yeah, okay, I can. But I think that, by the way, I can bash Kieran a little bit because I know him really well. But yeah, I think if you'll indulge me challenging you a little bit, you gave a really distinct overview of how you faced this key area and you built a program around that key area. And it rings a lot of bells for me of what I did, right, when I was building and leading enablement. And I think it's a little bit digging our own grave. So one thing that really stands out to me in the report is when we ask frequency questions, what frequency do you get feedback? Do you get coaching? Do you get practice? We've shown you in the report that you'll see that we segment between the audience that's answered it. And on feedback and coaching in particular, there's a big difference between how frequently managers think they give coaching and how frequently reps think they get coaching. And I don't think it's one side lying. I think it's that they don't agree on the definition. And I think that if we take what Kieran just said around this amazing like program development of what are we doing, why are we doing it, let's get everyone bought into that, let's make sure that we've got all the workflows, all the cadence, like the operating rhythm around it. But that needs to be a corporate level. We love a playbook, right? Not a one-pager, but a playbook. It needs to be a corporate level playbook of this is what enablement is, right? And Kieran said right at the start, I don't like words like feedback, like it's all enablement, right? But the reality is that a lot of the problems that exist come because there is no universal alignment of what reps should get. And that creates tension between managers and enablement. It creates a massive lack of direction that I know we're going to get to, right? Between what leaders want and what reps want. And it creates this like general feeling of someone's always upset, right? Because if two different people have two different opinions and you do something, either everyone's upset or one side's upset, right? And given that there's this stigma that enablement and training is time away from productivity, right? It's time away from customers. Like everyone has to be bought into what they're doing. And I think that, and it's a key point that we make in the write-up of this thing, is there just needs to be this kind of, I don't know, it's a very political year, right? So without taking sides, there needs to be this kind of enablement constitution, right? Enablement declaration, enablement, whatever we want to call it, right? That every department signs, right? Like maybe literally, like the CRO says, like signs it and says, I'm in, the enablement team says they're in, the senior revenue leader says they're in, the line managers say they're in, the reps say they're in, that everyone agrees and says, this is what we need to do. Because just like we can't evaluate the impact of a one-time webinar, right? We also can't evaluate if we're even doing our jobs correctly if we don't all agree on what our job should be. So I think that there's this much bigger, more, let's do what Kieran said, but let's ironically build a playbook. Yeah, I'll come back to that terrible joke, but I think it's what we need to do.
Yeah, I agree. I was thinking as you guys were talking, like if the managers are saying they're too busy to coach their team, how do we get them to spend time learning how to coach? Like that's really like it, even because if they say reps say they want more coaching, but they're busy. Managers say they want to give coaching, they want to learn how to coach. But I would say the frontline manager is one of the hardest jobs, but it's also the easiest one to make excuses about how busy you are and how you can't do this and you can't do that. And they get a pass oftentimes, just like their team members get a pass. Oh, they can't update the CRM because they have this quota to hit. And like what's the bare minimum that we're all agreeing to here? And then, what role does enablement play in that? And it's got to go layers up. That I think is one of the challenges that overarchingly we're experiencing. And one of the topics that we wanted to bring up is, so how do you realign? Is it enablement leader and frontline manager saying, let's reset expectations? I don't think so. I think you have to go way up. And somehow we have to make these leaders see this as a priority, because it's like, if you just keep looking at hitting your number every quarter, rather than building a framework for future success, nothing's ever going to change. And then this whole what is enablement continues to be an enigma. Like yesterday, I got asked by a manager, can you teach my new hires how to add their signature in Chili Piper? No, there's a resource for that. You can make sure they did that, but it's not 100% their fault. So moving the conversation into this idea of how do we shift? How does maybe this data help us? How can technology help us shift to leading the charge, but understanding that we're not the authority figure?
The tech company CEO, right? Like, I think technology is massively overrated, but both in like the table stake stuff that we were talking about earlier and even new tech, right? Like we are not going to solve this problem. Replicate Labs isn't going to solve this problem, right? This is a structural planning organizational problem. And I think that like, and also like managers quite often genuinely don't have the time. Like I had two jobs, right? I have the enablement job, and then I ran a 100+ person customer facing team. And so I was probably the most motivated leader in the whole business that I worked at, right? To actually do a lot of this stuff. And I legitimately didn't have the time. And often it was because I was mandatory told to do things that I had to do by certain time periods that I didn't agree with, but I was told by the CRO that I had to do them. Right. So there is, and I think it's this silo thing, right? Even the report, reps, enablers, managers, like the way it's presented is these 4 segments. But I think it's that it's not all working together is like a large part of the core of it. But Yeah, the CRO piece, I think this is our next topic, I think is the degree of the problem without getting too spicy. There's a phrase that's the fish rots from the head, right? That's pretty spicy. But there's some data here that I think is undeniable. And one thing that we should point out, by the way, when the survey is producing strong results is we didn't write this. They did. This isn't our opinion. Like this is legitimately like hundreds of people that are in these roles for this in 6,000 individual questions answered. Yeah. Should we go on to that
Yeah,
killer topic?
let's do it. Let's do it. And this is where we talk about layoffs too, right? So the
Oh yeah.
question, I think if we polled is in your real world experience, in your organization, is enablement seen as a cost center or revenue center? Let me type this in here. And I guess that's by the most senior leadership of your revenue org, right, James? As you see it, the CRO/CFO unit of your business, the people that are making the decisions about who stays, who goes, what functions stay and go. Let's see.
Yeah, just to clarify the definition, right? Investment means even if we're not getting an immediate return, we expect this long term to produce a result for us. Cost center means when I have to cut costs, cost centers go first.
Yeah.
So what percentage of people do we reckon? What percentage of leaders do we reckon said one or the other? Any thoughts?
Let's see what we're getting over here. Anyone? Not getting much on this one. Cost center.
Whoa, that's some spice.
Let's. I see Terry says now yes, previously no. I'm thinking you mean cost center. And I think part of this is because if you look back to when a lot of us started in sales, there were sales trainers. Those were people that showed up in a room and delivered content. But the enablement function that's like building things, implementing things, working towards execution and adoption is different. And I know we all like to see ourselves as different than a trainer.
Yeah, and Jay just made a really good point. From a financial perspective, enablement is a cost, right? It's not tied to quota carrying, like it's going to be classified as a cost. We're saying more from like a psychological perspective. Do you think that you're investing in the future of your revenue org, or do you think that you're paying a fee for a thing that you don't really believe in because everybody else is doing it, right? Which is not how the question was phrased, but is effectively what it meant. So yeah, the answer, Ashir, do you want to share the actual number? Okay, 23% of senior leaders right now, today, that did the survey, think enablement is surplus to requirements, which I guess aligns with the 25% number from earlier, right? Of what would happen if you turned off. It's probably the same population. I think the one other thing I'd love to layer into this, Leanne, is the data around that feels low, right? The sentiment as well, I'm sure. I think the one thing I'd like to layer into this is who decides what enablement does.
Yes, yes.
We asked in the survey, we asked enablers and senior leaders, and I think line managers, who dictates what we get trained on and coached on and what the programs are, right? And everyone agrees that it's the senior leader, right? But then we asked another question, which we only asked to enablement, who are executing the plan, and to senior leaders, who everyone agrees are coming up with the plan, what they base their decisions on of what we get, what we have to enable. And there was this really polarizing data that Ashir will share, where enablers said that they basically thought, I think, 56% thought that basically the senior leader was just making it up. It was just saying, right now, I want you to go and buy a value selling methodology. Let's go and do that. Or I want you to medic's like the most like obsessive qualification framework of the last couple of years. And it was just based on like gut instinct, opinion, view, sentiment, that kind of thing. And when we asked the senior leaders the same thing, the vast majority of them said that they used data, right? 60% said they used data. But then we asked them a very sneaky question, which was, what data do you use? And it was an open text question. And almost every single one of them answered it. And we took all of those open text questions and we classified them into personal opinion or quantitative data, right? And it was almost exclusively personal opinion. So without knowing it, senior leaders validated that they basically make it up. So the thing that really makes, and again, I was both, but the thing that really makes my blood boil about this dynamic, right, is an enablement leader. if the enablement that they're leading is nothing to do with them, right? That's one. And then the second one, which is the real kind of killer to me, is exactly what you said. These are the same people that are making the layoff decisions, right? So I'm going to hire this team of people. I'm going to randomly dictate to them what I want them to do based on my own personal opinion. I'm not going to measure it. Then I'm going to, and I don't think it's going to work. I'm pretty sure people would do better without it. And then the second the market turns, which is arguably the time you need enablement more than ever, I'm just going to fire them all. And that sounds like a brutal personal opinion, but it's objectively based on the answers that very group of people have given in this survey.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to stop talking for a bit.
That's it though. I think of like when I was going through the search after being laid off. Now, granted, in my last layoff, I passed 2 rounds. I was part of the 3rd round of layoffs at this one company. So I guess they saw the value in the first couple rounds. But then at some point it was, we have to cut this. And our compensation is decent. In a lot of our orgs, we're not entry, even mid-level compensated. But then when I was going through the interview process, everybody was all hot on enablement. So I was like, okay, is it just some companies are doing it right and some companies are doing it wrong? But then even in my current company, not complaining, but I got into it and there was still the person that hired me and told me the vision was like, yeah, that's totally it. And we're still reframing 4 months in what it is with the rest of the team. Luckily, I feel like I have support in that reframe, but it's such a change in behavior. And I think it's just folks thinking they can just plug us in and everything work like the vision is supposed to work. And it's a lot of work to actually get enablement right, even if you hire the right person.
Do you know, I think this brings up another area that enablement gets stuck. And I think one of the most difficult things, or the most difficult aspects of enablement, especially as a leader, is the enablement maturation or the maturity of your enablement department. So I think so often when we go in, we have to be reactive and be responsive to things. And I think even if you go in there with the promise of being able to change things and change that perception, there is normally a massive laundry list of things to do. And then while you're fighting those fires, you get more things added on top. So then what happens is you get stuck in that reactive phase for such a long period of time. And all that vim and gusto you had to go in and change that perception. And this is something I'm living through right now. But you and I spoke when we were both out of work, and you and I see things very similarly, but I just took the point of view. I have this, it started as like an interview task and it's turned into like a manifesto document of like how I see enablement. So
Yeah.
I would just, ahead of that being asked of any task, I would send it like, if this is how I see enablement, if this is not how you see enablement, that's cool, but I'm not your guy. And I just position enablement as a strategic internal consultant and this is where we should have, if you want to go from 100 to 125 million, that's when you talk to us, not when you've made the plans and how you're going to do it. That's too late.
Yeah.
So I set my stall out, and I'll be transparent about my journey where I am. When I come in, the perception of enablement was essentially that of product marketing. So I spoke to all the leaders and I would say, okay, as you do when you first start, and I said, okay, what do you like about enablement? What would you change? We like how quickly they get us the content. So we still do TAM slides. They ask us for deck assistance, which is wild. They would like more case studies in it. So like from day one, I was fighting, you're turning an oil tanker, right? That's what that is at that point. But I've been very lucky and worked very hard to change that perception. If you were to use Stephanie Meadows' model, and if no one is aware of her book, I would get her book on the enablement maturity model. And within 3 months, we've managed to go all the way to the optimized phase. So now we have 75% of our programs aligned to strategic business objectives. And we still have that 25% there, variability for the ad hoc, but that's taken, and this is the bit that I don't think is spoken about an awful lot when it comes to, and I work directly with the CMO and the CRO, but it's really lonely being an agent of change. Like really lonely, because you go in there with this voice and you're trying to change this perception and it's exhausting and it's not spoken about enough, right? I've only got 2 people in my team, 3 people in my team at this point in time. And you're educating them and you're upskilling them and how to look for metrics and how to benchmark and how to say no and how to push back and how to set these boundaries. But on the other side, you're still fighting and pushing back on, like, this is not our job anymore. This is marketing. This is this. And I'll be open about it. I found myself tired in the last 3 months, and you get that lonely sort of feeling of, am I shouting into a wind tunnel at this point? Or is anything making sense? And the penny dropped when I actually got to put forward my H2 plans, because I spoke through the plans with the CRO, and I knew, obviously from being a day-to-day, I knew the things that he expected, but I also have pitched all the things that I have seen. And regardless of the number of those calls I listened to, the reason I listened to that many calls, and I do still now, even though I've got chorus, which is, I think I on the enablement squad Slack group,
Hey, Karen.
I-
Sorry. You're on a roll. I love it, but we got to make sure we get people some content in the last couple minutes. So James,
sorry.
there's so much good here, but James, tell us what we can expect from the survey after this.
We could honestly go on for hours. And by the way, if anyone wants to continue the conversation with us, I'm sure all of us are perfectly happy to, not on the call, but to keep it going offline. So look, I think the highlights are that every single piece of data that everything we've discussed today is based on data from hundreds of people that took the survey. It's not based entirely on our own opinion, and it covers some core themes. So planning is a big theme, right? Who's responsible for what enablement is, what it focuses on. Then you've got your actual execution of training is another section. Then of course you've got your big loop of feedback, coaching, and practice, and then evaluation. And if any of you would like to the report does not actually officially come out until next week, but if you click on that link that I've just dropped in the chat, you can go and get your own copy. So the link is live, it's just unlisted, and you can get access to it. Whilst we are a vendor and we did commission this survey, the vast scope of this survey is not aligned with our business. So there's a page on it about our business, right? But a lot of the stuff that the survey talks about is outside of our scope, but we do want to be part of the solution, right? So I'm more than happy to, keep the conversation going with anybody that would like, but please do go and get a copy of the report and let us know what you think. We want it to be something you can actually use, right, in these planning discussions and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. Thanks everyone so much for joining. James, Kieran, thanks for being here with us today. And happy to continue some of these conversations. You guys catch us on LinkedIn and let us know how we can help.